Hey everybody, welcome back to Record-ology. Today we're going to talk about how do record players work. We're going to look at a lot of cool record players too. And at the end of the show, I'm going to show you how you can get your very own custom square clear record. You're not going to want to miss this.
I am the Edison phonograph, created by the great wizard of the New World to delight those who would have...
Welcome back to the studio. I'm so glad you're here. Today is going to be totally awesome. So we're going to do two things. We're going to look at a bunch of record players and talk about how record players work. And then I'm going to show you how you can get a custom record made with a friend of mine who runs another channel you may have heard of called The Victrola Guy, Benjamin J. So we'll get into that in a minute. But first, let's go over how record players work. All right, one of the first key differentiators is record player or turntable. You've heard both of those terms. What do they mean? To me, a record player is something like this, a unit that has built-in speakers. And a turntable is something like this that does not. And you need to connect external speakers or an external sound system. We'll talk about that in more detail, whereas the record player, you do not. Don't be fooled into thinking all record players are bad and all turntables are good. There are certainly good and bad versions of each. Okay, let's talk about some of the similarities that you're going to find no matter what record player you're looking at. You're going to have this thing in the middle that rotates. Obviously, this supports the record itself, and this is called the platter. The platter supports the record. Sometimes platters will have a piece of something on top. This one has a rubber piece, and that is called a platter mat. If you're a DJ and you're doing scratching stuff like this, first of all, you can't use this type of a record player. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Second of all, they use what's called a slip mat. The job is to safely allow the record to slide in a different speed and direction than the platter itself. But for people that listen to records for the purposes of audio quality and listening, they're going to want a platter mat that's designed to create some adhesion between the record itself and the platter, meaning that it holds it firm, it holds it still so it's not sliding around. And rubber is a good method for doing that. You're going to also see felt and a number of other materials used for that same purpose. But this is the platter. Every other part of the top portion of the turntable is referred to as the plinth. A record player and a turntable both require electricity to operate. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, what about vintage wind-up hand crank phonographs that we've covered a lot in the past? Today we're talking about more modern equipment, so we're going to keep it modern. So they run on electricity, so there is a motor inside. The motor can drive the platter because the rotation of the platter is what spins the record. The motor can drive the platter in a number of different ways. They can drive it with a belt. It can drive it directly with no belt, or it can use what's called an idler wheel to drive it. And those are three different ways that can function. All of them work completely fine. A lot of these entry-level units, and again, I want to stop and say entry-level doesn't mean bad. It doesn't necessarily mean cheap. It just means affordable. So you can have good entry-level, you can have bad entry-level. But on entry-level equipment, it's pretty common for them to use a belt drive motor. And belt drive is actually cool because it separates the vibrations of the motor from the platter. And why that's important is because when the stylus is on the record playing it, you don't want motor vibrations. I'm pointing over here because that's about where the motor is on this type. You don't want those motor vibrations causing feedback up into the stylus. Record players also often come with this. This is a 45 adapter. We actually make and sell our own custom 45 adapters, but the job of a 45 adapter is to allow a record with a large hole on it to fit onto the small spindle. Some records have a small spindle hole, some have a large spindle hole. This piece back here is called a tone arm, and it connects the head shell, cartridge, and stylus to the rest of the turntable. This piece right here that moves around when the tone arm is rotating is called a gimbal, and behind the gimbal you're going to see a counterbalance which helps counteract the weight of the cartridge and the tone arm itself. Some cheaper record players, instead of a counterbalance, have a spring. Record players also often have this lid on top. This is called a dust cover. Its job is to protect, obviously, objects from falling on the record player or dust particles as well. That's why it's called a dust cover. So this helps protect your investment. And your record player will have some sort of power supply. This one runs off of USB. And also you will often find an audio output connection, allowing you to connect it to powered speakers or your sound system. Arguably the most important part of a record player or a turntable is the cartridge. The cartridge is this piece down here that literally translates the record grooves into sound that you and I can hear. And of course, there's different types that have different benefits, etc. Regardless of what kind of cartridge you have, it rests underneath or in something called a head shell, which is this plastic piece up here on this particular unit. And this little thing sticking out the side is a finger lift that allows you to place the needle where you want it to play. Also, you'll hear the term needle and stylus. Those terms can be used interchangeably, although stylus is its official name. Oftentimes people call it a needle. And obviously the head shell is attached to the tone arm. A phono cartridge is a transducer. A transducer is a device that takes mechanical movement, mechanical energy, and converts it into electric energy. In the case of a phono cartridge, its job is to take the mechanical movement of the stylus in the groove and turn that into sound that you and I can hear. There are a few different types, the most common being these little red tip ones here. These are ceramic cartridges. A ceramic phono cartridge takes the mechanical movement of the stylus in the groove and converts it into sound energy by bending a rod. The principle is not dissimilar to the way a quartz watch works, sort of in reverse. That cartridge outputs electrical information that is amplified and sent through your speakers so that you and I can hear that as sound. Another common type, and of better quality, is a moving magnet cartridge, which makes up the bulk of what folks use these days. Magnetic phono cartridges use a moving magnet between coils that creates electrical energy based off of the mechanical movements of the stylus in the record. The sound quality of a moving magnet is generally higher, although it requires additional amplification. An even higher end type is called a moving coil, which is kind of the reverse of the moving magnet. A moving coil, the coil moves and the magnets are still. It outputs an even quieter signal and requires even more amplification, but can yield even higher quality sound. I've been looking forward to this day to show off this model cartridge in a little bit more detail. I showed it briefly in a recent show. I was actually talking about P-mount cartridges, which is out of the scope of today's video. And just by looking at this, I should have been able to tell this is not a P-mount cartridge. A P-mount cartridge is essentially a plug-and-play cartridge that was popular in the 80s. But the presence of these screw holes here tell me that this was never a P-mount cartridge design. This giant cartridge was designed for a salesperson to use, perhaps in an Audio-Technica showroom. So it's much more enlarged than the real phono cartridge would be, but it makes it great for demonstration purposes like this. So I wanted to kind of talk about the cartridge basics. Some cartridges, especially vintage ones, have these little guards that come down to protect the stylus, which is really neat. That way you can just set it down and you don't have to worry about damaging the stylus. Here on a real cartridge here, oftentimes those little protectors just slide off, which is much more common. But you'll run into these vintage ones that had the built-in one, which is nice. So on the back, you'll see 4 terminals, which are color-coded for ground, positive, negative, etc. And cartridges can have, a different order of which these are configured. But just know that the cartridge itself requires no electricity to operate. So it's not receiving any power. It is purely generating electrical impulse information. So it is sending electrical information. It's not receiving any. It doesn't take anything to operate, something to be aware of. But once this gets going, this will actually send the information down wires that connect to the back of this. Typically, on a higher end cartridge, you'll see these wires are part of what the head shell makeup is. So this head shell is a 1/2-inch mount removable SME type head shell. Some turntables allow you to remove the head shell so you can upgrade the cartridge and alignment, which is again beyond the scope of today's video, but you'll see that those wires belong to this, and this connects to a tone arm that has a receptacle designed for it, and the wires continue down that tone arm to where it is amplified. So that's what those terminals are on the back. I want to look closer down here. So this rod here is called a cantilever. Its job is really to translate the movements of the stylus into the cartridge itself. This right down here is called a pivot or a boot, and it's like a little rubber hinge, and it allows the movement of the stylus to not damage anything and function the way it should. The needle itself is even tinier. It's located right down here at the tip. The needle or stylus lives at the end of the shank. The shank is the piece that connects the stylus to the cantilever itself. The stylus itself is the very tip that makes contact with the record. It's usually made of diamond. That's the preferred material because diamond is the hardest substance in the world. Cheaper ones oftentimes are made out of sapphire, which works as well, but just wears out faster. Some higher end cartridges have what is called a nude stylus, where the entire shank and stylus is one solid piece of diamond. Those are the best. They're more expensive. They sound better. And most of the time you're going to have what's called a bonded stylus, where a tiny chip of diamond is at the very end of a steel shank that connects it to the cantilever. If we look at a record surface under a microscope, we're going to see one spiral that forms a groove. A record usually only has one groove that starts on the outside of the record and works its way all the way to the inside of the record. And if you were to zoom in very closely on that groove, it would look something like this. This is like a little 2-inch square of a record surface, and you can see the groove there. So it moves left to right, it moves up and down, and you guessed it, the needle, the stylus, literally rides in there collecting those movements and translates it into electrical information like we just talked about. Okay, you now know the basics. So let's talk about some variations and some more complex types. This is a vintage Technics direct drive linear turntable from the early 80s. This is a beautiful unit that a viewer sent to me, and it's got some things that are a little bit different, so I wanted to point it out. First of all, you'll notice there's no tone arm in here. Like, where's the tone arm? You know, the part that goes across and plays the record itself. Well, there actually is a tone arm. It's located up here in the lid, and it's straight and it's short. Why on earth would a record player have that? This is what designates it to be a linear tracking turntable. In essence, where a normal pivoting turntable's tone arm, it's like a tongue twister, turntable tone arm plus tacks, rotates across the record, a linear tracking tone arm moves like this in a straight form and fashion across the record playing surface and back. The reason being is that a pivot will introduce inaccuracies in sound reproduction because of the fact that as the tone arm rotates over the surface of the record, it's at a continuously changing angle, meaning that the position of the needle in the groove changes throughout the course of the record. So there are minute, and when I say minute, I mean minute differences in sonic changes that can be introduced by doing it that way. Most of the time, people don't notice it. They don't have an issue with it. Some people think this entire concept of a linear tracker is just rubbish because there's extra electronics and mechanical things that can go wrong. They're higher maintenance. And they were really popular in the 80s for a while, but then they kind of faded out and you won't see any new ones being made that I know of. And something to be aware of. But the idea being, in theory, that as the needle plays across in a linear fashion, it's always straight. It's never crooked. It's never in a weird angle. It's always straight in the groove. And in theory, that will give you better sound quality because the records are cut with a lathe, and the lathe is going to be cutting it in a linear fashion. So the thought process is if you cut it in a linear fashion like this, then you shouldn't play it back in a non-linear fashion like that. And that's essentially what this is. This is also a direct drive turntable. So instead of there being a belt under this, there is not. This is an interesting piece. It's kind of hard to get the platter off, but if you lift the platter off, this is an aluminum platter, you will see that there's no motor and belt there. Well, there is a motor. Actually, the platter itself is a motor. You can see down there that this is actually a brushless motor, half of it, and the other half is on the bottom side of the platter itself. You can see the magnet. I also want to point out these strobe markings here. The strobe markings allow a light to be shined onto this surface. It uses a prism and a mirror down here. A light shines up through a mirror, and it allows you to see how accurate the speed is. So that's kind of how that works. But yeah, direct drive motors have more power on startup. That is called torque. So basically it's 0 to 60 speed is faster and it's got more power. If a DJ is using a turntable, it has to be a direct drive type. They can't use a belt drive type. So that's what that is. This one's pretty advanced too, because in addition to everything else we talked about, this automatically senses the size of the record. You'll see these little slots in the platter mat, which is rubber in this case, that align with these little holes in the platter. Once it gets back here, there's actually little optical sensors. So if you put a small record on that only covers the first hole, it knows it's a 7-inch record, and therefore it knows to drop the tone arm at the start of that 7-inch record. Or if you have the second hole and the first hole covered up, it knows it's a 10-inch record and to drop the tone arm right there. Or if it's a full 12-inch record, it knows to drop it at the outside edge, which is really cool. Some record players have similar systems that use little feelers that physically feel the record. Some use light. Some linear tracking turntables can function like CD players, where you can literally skip through the tracks. You can pick track number 7 by pressing a number 7. This one's a pretty basic one. Turntables and record players will always have a place to change speeds. And like I said, most of what you're going to find out there in the mid-range is going to be 2 speeds, 33 and 45. Also, ability to change pitch, and we've gone into this in full detail. I won't explain that, but essentially pitch is speed. So if you change the speed, it's going to make the voices or the music sound higher pitch or lower pitch, and you want that to be accurate. So looking at the strobe, you can see that the lights shining on that strobe surface are still, and that means that the speed is accurate, and therefore if you need to make adjustments to that, you can do so. So we're hitting this all very high level. If we need to go into more detail, feel free to check out many of our other videos where we do that. Also, being an automatic turntable, you can simply press one button to start, one button to stop. And remember where the cueing lever was on that other record player? This has a switch, so you just push a button and the tone arm lifts up. This also has a repeat function as well. Looking at the back of this turntable, you'll notice that there's no jacks to plug in your speakers or your external sound system. Well, there are, but they're permanently connected. You can see how old and dingy these ones are. People prefer them to be the type that are just, you plug in, and obviously that's more optimal. But a lot of the older ones will have permanently attached cables. Also, it's important to understand too that if you have a vintage turntable like this, you need to add something to it called a preamp. And a preamp is essentially a miniature amplifier that ups the volume or signal strength to that of line level. One of the downsides of a moving magnet and a moving coil cartridge is they output a very low level signal, and it's not strong enough to plug into your receiver or your powered speakers, etc. You need an extra something. Now you can get a phono preamp for pretty cheap, like 15, 20 bucks on Amazon. You can also invest and get a higher end one as well. This is a pretty entry level range one. This is just a little Crosley P10. This is very basic. There's no controls. You literally plug in your wires from your vintage turntable, left and right stereo RCA, and then a grounding wire as well. So you connect the ground wire, the phono in. This little guy plugs into the wall, obviously, amplifies the power of the electrical signal, and you can connect the output straight into your powered speakers or receiver. I know there's a lot of clutter here, but what you're looking at is a very, very cheap record player from Five Below that uses that same ceramic cartridge we looked at earlier. This one's pretty low quality, and we've done full reviews of all this stuff. So if you're interested in any of these, you can dive into those videos. But Anyway, I wanted to use this as a discussion point around the preamp. These ceramic systems with these little red tip ceramic cartridges don't require a preamp. That's because that cartridge actually outputs a line level signal by itself. It doesn't require a preamp circuit, which is one reason why they're cheap, because they have less circuitry, etc. But they're just kind of known to be more harsh, sometimes a little more tinny, not as lush sounding as a magnetic, but something to be aware of. That's why companies often spec those cheap ceramics out when they could be putting a magnetic on, because it would cost them more money to do so. Also, if you're very new to this, you'll find it strange that once you start posting pictures of your new record player, especially if it's a suitcase player, an all-in-one, you're excited about it. You're like, hey, look, I got a record player. There'll be all these nasty people online that will, tell you all these bad things. And there is a lot of what's called gatekeeping in this hobby. Every hobby has gatekeeping, but there's a lot of people that get nasty and mean about entry-level equipment. And I want you to be encouraged that it doesn't matter what they think. It only matters if you're having fun and if you're enjoying it. So if you enjoy it, you love it, don't let any of those people do that. This is a vintage portable record player. This is really cool. I always love getting a chance to show this on the channel. This is an old Philips record player. You may be saying, how do they fit a record player in there? Very compact. Let me show you how this works. So this is a record player. It's got a speaker. It's a little 45 adapter. And yes, you can take our custom adapters and put them on the spindle, the 45 spindle of a vintage unit. But yeah, that's designed to kind of sit there off to the side. Obviously, this is mono. It's not stereo. I wanted to show this for a couple of different reasons. So we can place the tone arm over here. The biggest reason is that this is not belt drive or direct drive. If you remember, we talked about belt drive and we talked about direct drive. But what is this? This is something altogether. I did mention it briefly earlier. This is called a rim drive. And what that means basically is it uses a little wheel underneath the platter. By the way, this is a very heavy platter. I don't know if that's steel. It feels heavier than aluminum, but that is a very hefty platter. By the way, your platter, the heavier the platter, the better, because the speed will be more regular. There'll be less distortions because of inconsistencies of speed, etc. It's kind of like a train. Things in motion like to stay in motion. So a cheap plastic lightweight platter oftentimes has a little bit more warbliness. We call it wow and flutter. Whereas a heavier metal or substantial material that's heavy, rotating along with your record, lends itself to more stable speeds. This actually uses belts and an idler wheel or rim drive. Rim drive and idler wheel are the same thing. Essentially what's happening is this rubber wheel right here is rotating, and usually it's in direct contact with the motor spindle, which is right here. This particular one uses a series of belts to relay, but this belt or this wheel right here made of rubber will rotate, which will then make contact with the inside of the platter itself, the rim of the platter, and it will drive the mechanism. It'll rotate the record. So that's a rim drive, and they're really cool. And how they transfer different speeds and how they're adjusted is pretty fascinating stuff. There's also an ongoing debate, and as you get into this hobby, you will hear people, and everybody thinks they're right. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But by the way, this uses an old ceramic or actually crystal type of cartridge. Again, doesn't require a preamplifier. Sound quality isn't going to be as high fidelity as a modern moving magnetic, but these are fun for what they are. They can sound pretty dang good. But you'll start to hear, getting this all packed in is kind of tricky, but you will start to hear opinions from everybody. And one of the common opinions is that there's no good new equipment. You should always go vintage. Don't buy anything new, only buy vintage. Gosh, this is really tricky to get in here, right? This wire. There's actually a little thing here where you can stretch it around a little bit, but this surface of this magnet rests almost on top of that spindle. And some people are like, well, what about the cool modern units? And like, no, all vintage is good, all modern is bad. And again, when you hear people talking in absolutes, don't believe it, don't trust it, because there are good and bad new, there are good and bad old. If you see something like this on the shelf at your antique mall and you're like, oh, I got to get that, that'll be a great way to play records. First of all, antique malls are notoriously overpriced, so you may want to be careful about the prices that they're at. They'll think records are worth way more than they are too. But vintage units will often require repairs. They'll need recapping and things of that nature, lubrication, new belts, new idler wheels. All the rubber stuff will harden and crack and dry over time. Sometimes they're just fine right off the shelf, nothing needed, maybe some light lubrication, but nothing else. But oftentimes vintage equipment needs work and takes money to do that work. The crystal cartridges, the old ceramics, will dry and fail. So at a minimum, you're often looking at new cartridges, new belts. Just be aware of that, okay? Vintage is not always bad. In fact, it can be very, very good, but just be aware of that. Whereas a new unit, maybe on the average of lower quality, will require less extra investment right up front. Another myth out there that you're going to hear is that if the record hangs over the edge of the platter, it means it's a terrible record player. Nothing could be more further from the truth. Okay, a lot of other things could be more further from the truth, but that's not a good way to look at it. There are plenty of small platters that sound good. It's not the size of the platter that matters. In fact, many record players like this one are designed for the record to hang over the edge. As you can see on this one, very far over the edge. If we put a record on here, let's find the hole. Where's the hole? Somewhere in this vicinity. You will see that it hangs considerably over the edge. That's not what's important. What's important is the mass inertia, or the material that the platter itself is made out of. Remember when I was showing you the metal of that other one? Well, guess what? This has a plastic one, very lightweight, doesn't have much mass inertia. In fact, the record itself provides most of that mass inertia. That's more of a risk, the material of the platter versus the size of the platter. Okay, so here are two record players that look very similar in their form factor. This is a Crosley Revolution, I think is what it's called. And this is a Audio-Technica Soundburger. And they both look very similar, but one sounds good and the other one does not sound as good. And I'll tell you why. It all has to do with that platter. Now you may look, okay, shiny metal, what's the problem? Well, this one over here looks like shiny metal, when in fact, that's actually plastic painted metal. So it's lightweight, and as such, there's a lot of wow and flutter, a lot of those speed distortions. Even though this is a red tip stylus, it's actually a magnetic type. So the stylus isn't bad at all. So what happens is when you put a lightweight record on here, like a little 7-inch record, a lot of wow and flutter. But if you put a full-size record on there, it's not bad. Whereas this one right here, you open it up, looks a lot like the other one, and I don't think you can pull up this platter mat, but that's a rubber platter mat on top of a much heavier metal platter. Acts kind of like a flywheel, where its rotation has a mass inertia effect that keeps the speed and the sound stable. So just a little FYI. It's been a while since we showed my pride and joy on this channel. This is my 1949 Philco. And the reason why I show this is it is a slot loader. We've shown a few slot loader record players over the years, but this is amazing because you'd literally just insert your record like a CD. And it play. This is 1949, people. This is tube amplified, no transistors, Bakelite, wood, and it's a modern marvel of engineering. Actually, more of a vintage marvel of engineering. And it's an interesting type. So it has a pivoting tone arm, and when it reaches the end of the record, the tone arm comes back to its starting position via a string and the mechanical movement of this lid, etc. And it just sounds great. Again, as a warning and a caveat to folks, I want to remind you that this isn't just going to work off the shelf if you find one of these. This particular one is pretty rare. But if you find like a 46 Philco, which is the Bing Crosby record player, very similar to this, I also have one of those. It's going to need recapping. It's going to need new cartridge. It's going to need speakers. It's going to need a lot of things. This one took extensive work. My friend Fartamark here on YouTube did the restoration work for me. It was not cheap. It took time, and we had to ship it all across the country because I actually acquired this in Houston, shipped it to the East Coast, and it was shipped down here to Florida, and that was a lot of shipping of a heavy item, not cheap. But I wanted to bring this up because it will play something called a 78. Now, if you remember, we talked about 78s earlier. 78 is a speed that was more common prior to the advent of a modern LP or 45 RPM record, 33 or 45. 78 RPM denotes the speed, obviously. So this has a 78 RPM record player in it, but also the size of the stylus is different. So if you were to take this record and look at it under a microscope compared to a modern record, you would see that this groove is a lot larger. This is a 3 mil groove, whereas a modern record player will have anywhere from a 0.6 to a 0.7, 0.8, sometimes up to a 1 mil groove. And those are called micro grooves. So modern records, and I'm talking like post late 40s, mid 50s max and onward, are going to be primarily micro groove records and record players, and anything before that is going to use a wider groove. And that's important to know, because if I put a wide groove record on a modern record player with a micro groove stylus that's much smaller than these grooves, this is going to sound noisier. A lot of people say it damages things. I think it's more about noise than damage. However, something to be aware of, which you really, really, really don't want to do, is put a modern record in one of these vintage units. We did that just for the fun of it. And as you can imagine, the force exerted on that record destroyed it. Whereas you play an old record on a modern one, it just won't sound as good unless you upgrade the stylus. They make modern wide groove 3 mil styli, which is cool. So you can listen to these on modern equipment if you upgrade the stylus. Let's go ahead and insert our record. You just slide it in like that. Helps if you make sure it's on. And then you close the door and it starts playing. Now, friend of the channel, one of my mentors, somebody who helped me in getting started doing YouTube back in 2017, who had a lot more experience, still does, doing all of this stuff. His name is Benjamin J, and he runs The Victrola Guy on YouTube. And he recently acquired a Presto 6N record lathe from 1950, which allows him to cut records at either 33, 45, 78 RPM in either 7, 10, or 12 inches. He made a couple for me, and I wanted to highlight his service. So his company is called Canaphonic Records, and I'm going to put contact information in the description of this video. You can email him at thevictrolaguy@gmail.com. He's got so many cool videos, very, very interesting. Did a lot of cylinder recordings back in the day, tinfoil recordings, a lot of really, really cool stuff. So he offers 2 primary record types that he can create. And I have examples here. I have some direct feed sound tests, etc. This is a vinyl record. Obviously, this is a 7-inch vinyl record. And you can see it's got a couple of tracks recorded to each side. We talked earlier about records having a continuous groove from start to finish. These are a little different, only because he created this record specifically this way. This has what's called a locked groove. This will play from here to the middle and then stop. The middle groove does not connect this song and that song, which is kind of interesting. A lot of radio stations would use a locked groove system so they didn't accidentally play the next song, but just kind of interesting. Again, it goes to show you the customization that he can do. This is going to be the higher quality, less noise surface. If you ever wondered why vinyl, why shellac, shellac is what 78s were made out of, and at the time shellac was the quietest surface that they could record sound into. Actually, it was recorded into wax, and then it was pressed into shellac, and that process produced the quietest background for playing a record. Eventually, they discovered that vinyl, or PVC, was a even quieter material to do so. The Victrola Guy also makes these very cool records here. This is a record. This is a piece of polycarbonate, specifically Lexan brand polycarbonate. Virtually indestructible. Vinyl is virtually indestructible as well. And it's a clear square record, which is super, super cool. Now, his lathe has the ability to cut records as well as emboss records. Right now, he's focusing on embossing records. So these are both embossed records. I've found personally that the best results come from using an elliptical stylus, something we didn't talk about earlier in the show, but essentially an elliptical stylus has a little different shape to it than a regular conical stylus. So check out these cool videos where he shows the process start to finish.
Greetings, Benjamin J. The Victrola Guy with another in the series. Well, getting ready to do the third test of the new stylus, so I wanted to do a quick video. Now this is the stylus, as you see, Presto Sapphire Embossing Stylus. Long shank, these things are $100 each. Anyway, got a new stylus, installed it, making some really decent recordings. Going to make a third test. So engage the feed screw, lower the stylus, we're cutting a groove. We'll give it 3 intro grooves and start the audio file. Now normally I would do a couple of lead out grooves, but I want to save this space for doing tests. So just going to do a locked groove here, disengage the feed screw and then raise the stylus. After one revolution, that groove will overlap itself and become a locked groove. That way your stylus on the turntable will stop there. All right, the disc is recorded. Let's move over to the turntable. Really decent recording. I wanted to show you where the volume control is. There's the volume control for the playback from the turntable, as opposed to the volume going to the recording head. So you can see how much power it takes to drive that recording head. This is a 500 watt amplifier. Anyway, just wanted to do a third test of that stylus. As you can see, it's making some excellent recordings. That was first rate, no doubt.
We're not above, let's misbehave. We're all alone, no chaperone can get our number. The world's in slumber, let's misbehave.
All right, my friends, and that's going to do it. Thank you so much for all of your support. Don't forget to check out the Victrola Guy's material on YouTube and order yourself a custom record. It's really fun. But that's going to do it for now, so happy record hunting, and we'll see you next time.